Hello all, Ulrich here with a video breaking down a Starfleet vessel that appears a couple of times in canon and is originally just a mixture of two other ships. I've already alluded to it in part of the Frankenstein Fleet video, but that is non-canonical, as far as I know, so this is to cover the Centaur class specifically, and some of the filtering lore around that derived from numerous other sources. In real life, the Centaur class was constructed as a kitbash from the Excelsior class models and a Miranda class. These two models were not to scale with one another, so when they were combined, they created a large Miranda body on a smaller Excelsior head. This has resulted in some scaling issues in Apocrypha, but that's not exactly new for Star Trek. The saucer had the shuttle bay of the Excelsior atop the hull, while the Miranda had the roll bar inverted and added underneath along with the torpedo pod to create the Centaur's shape. The nacelles were a new design and pretty unique for the class, and originally the ship was simply known as an Excelsior variant. Its original purpose was to act as a sort of destroyer-style vessel. As a kitbash, it did not really undergo a design stage or concepting from scratch, such as other Trek vessels do, and it was created to bring variety to the Federation fleet. However, with it being an obvious mixture of two iconic vessels, this was tied into its backstory for in-universe lore. The Starfleet Advanced Ship Design Bureau facility at Utopia Planitia Fleet Yards was ultimately responsible for the construction of the earliest Centaur-class medium cruisers, derived from the Excelsior-class project. This is nothing new for Starfleet, as their ship designs often spawn several other similar-looking vessels based on the breakthroughs made in one project filtering through to another. See the Galaxy-class saucer style of the 2350s to 70s. With the prototype USS Excelsior being developed to house the Transwarp Drive project through to 2293, the Centaur class was put on hold for some time until that project was completed. While initial designs were penned around 2385, the first of the line, the USS Centaur, would not see active service until much later. Essentially, the plan was to create a class of ship that would be based on the advances of the Excelsior class, but on a fraction of the scale and resources. In the mid-2290s, the class was overhauled once more before entering production properly, and the Centaur being re-registered as NCC 42043. The ship was designed to manage crisis and response operations, as well as survey and patrol missions, a sort of grab bag of standard Starfleet missions, minus the extensive diplomatic ventures of ships like the Excelsior and Constitution. It served a secondary purpose as a science vessel, but overall sat in the middle ground of defence and discovery. In this fashion, it was similar to the Miranda class, although it was far less customisable than its contemporary, which is saying something considering it was still pretty adaptable and would often see internal systems overhauled for specific missions. Only a handful of these ships were produced, as Starfleet was becoming more focused on creating more multi-role ships during the 23rd and early 24th centuries. One principal feature for the Centaur was its speed. Alongside the saucer section of the Excelsior came its oversized impulse engines, now on a far smaller frame, so the Centaur was an excellent sublight vessel with high manoeuvrability. The Centaur class saw a large resurgence during the Dominion War. Although it was an older design, the Centaur was seen as more combat-capable alternatives to the Miranda class, and about as easy to produce, considering the myriad of spare parts that were around from ships like the decommissioned Excelsiors and Mirandas. These components could easily retrofit into a Centaur class, and even after 80 years of service, both of these designs were still in ample supply. The vessels of this era, however, strayed from their scientific and patrol origins, with heavier focuses on battle, as many ships of this era did. Their role in the war was effectively to be a patrol ship that could act as a deterrent, warning to Starfleet, and as the first line of defence against Dominion forces. Some Centaur, like the USS Resolute NCC 92317, received an overhaul of their engineering hull to a larger, more spacious drive section, and some more alterations to the fore shuttle bay with a new design. Overall, the Resolute had a more scientific profile than the Dominion War era Centaur classes, although both designs remained present into the late 24th century. There was also the USS Elysium NCC 39851, which was produced by the Beta Z Clarity shipyard in 2340, and it had extra fusion reactors and additional antimatter pods to create an even faster variation of the Centaur. This was the only ship of its kind and unfortunately was destroyed in the Dominion War at the Battle of Beta Z. It appears the Centaur line was finally ended around the conclusion of the Dominion War, but the vessels are in service and would continue to remain there well into 2384. The Centaur class's scale does seem to vary on whether or not you pick the Excelsior-style saucer as being the one-to-one with an Excelsior, or the Miranda-looking engineering hull. But while a smaller vessel, the former seems to be the more common point of comparison, with the Centaur being 381 metres long, 320 wide, and 78.5 metres tall. It weighs in at a mass of 870,000 tonnes and has a crew of 315, although later models support far less at around 200. With the Centaur class being a relatively long-lived class like the Miranda or Excelsior, there have been several variations in its capabilities in things like armaments and warp. Towards the end of its line, however, it had a 1500 plus Cochrane warp core, which could cruise at warp 6 and maintain warp 9.6 for 12 hours before emergency shutdown. In terms of firepower, the Centaur class was surprisingly powerful considering its scale. It housed older phaser banks than phaser strips, a leftover from its time of original creation, and even newly constructed models used these banks. There were 9 Type 9, while it maintained 2 torpedo banks on average. But the versions created during the Dominion War had double this number with 18 phaser arrays and 4 torpedo tubes. This reflected their role as patrol and escort cruisers. Its main shuttle bay was on the top of the saucer section and carried around 8 Class 8 shuttles as well as a complement of standard repair and worker bees. In canon, it is effectively a sleek and fast patrol ship designed for combat, but with the games and Apocrypha fleshing out its role, the Centaur was given a long legacy that accompanied things like the Excelsior and saw its place across 2 centuries. Originally a specialised medium cruiser, the developments in technology saw its role diminish to a light cruiser in comparison to later designs. During the Dominion War, it saw a revival and was outfitted to be more combat-orientated, as an adroit counterpart to the ageing Excelsiors and alternative to the battleboat Mirandas. After the war, the remaining vessels still served as patrol ships, but the line was already on its way out when the war had started, with a final bolstering of the line before its conclusion in the late 24th century. For a kitbashed vessel, it's one of my favourite ships and comes off with a surprisingly cohesive look. The further refit of the Resurgence-style USS Resolute, with a newer hull and visible deflector, unified the design further, and overall it's a ship I adore. Thanks for watching this breakdown of the Centaur class. I've been Rick and I'll see you later. Until then, thanks again, and goodbye.